And we're back, and it is time to go behind the grind one more time. Season 2, episode 2. And again, we've got JJ Zachariason joining us from the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, Living the Stream, and many other things there. So make sure to take a second, whip back, catch the first part of the show there. Many good things going on there right now with the Patreon, with the Late Round Fantasy Football guru himself. So before we get into this, we got to figure out how you became the late round fantasy football quarterback here. And we're going to get into this here in just a second. But first, hey, when you introduce people, you need to come out with a bang, whether that's a closer coming in the 9th inning, whether that's a wrestler coming down to the ring. JJ, what is that music we're going to cue up to bring JJ down?
Are you saying entrance music? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah,
absolutely. What are you walking down the ring?
Man.
What are you coming to the mound for in the 9th inning? What's that music that you want the people to recognize when you're stepping out there?
Yeah. Okay. I would say that it's got to be Warren G's "Regulate" would probably be my go-to for walk-up music. It's just like it's a classic. Love me some 90s hip hop. And you know, you gotta love that tune.
Are you going to spit a few lyrics for us here? Are we going to get a little bit of a little sample there?
Man, I don't know if I can do that. I'll just tell everyone to mount up, and they'll know what I'm
there
talking
about.
You go. Hey, I got to try every single time we bring up this question to see if we get someone to give us a little something there. I think we've had one person do it, so we're working on it. So don't feel bad there.
Yeah. I don't know if I could go through every lyric, and it might not even be safe for work at times too.
Right. So we all know sports is important growing up. Did you play any sports growing up? And if you did, what sports were they?
Yeah. So I played baseball, from when I was like 5 until, through high school and such. So I played baseball. I sort of played too much of it. It was one of those like sports where like when I was younger, I was traveling, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so, I was traveling to Ohio and, different areas like closer in the proximity to Pittsburgh, and, playing like triple headers and doing that when I was like 12 years old. And, I loved the game so much, and I was obsessed with like late 90s baseball was just unbelievably fun. That was the time when I was really super into it. And that was when, the McGuire Sosa stuff was happening, and, people were juiced up, but it was also incredibly entertaining. And so, I played a lot of baseball, and then like literally every sport, like I would play, backyard with my neighborhood and my boys in the neighborhood, and played a lot of hockey, played a ton of football, backyard football, and was just in some hoops too. I always say, like, if there's one sport I wish I played more of, it's basketball, because as an adult, it's the sport that you can like most easily access and go back to, Right. And to me with basketball, I never got like proper training enough, so my mechanics are horrific, right? And I always there was like 1 year where I played so much that I just had the muscle memory for it, and I was like decent, right? Like I could go to the park and just start hooping, but like if I were to play right now, it would just be horrific. And I always wish that would be the sport that I got into more growing up. But baseball was my go-to growing up.
And who was your favorite some of your favorite players in your teams?
Man, I loved, this is the weirdest thing ever, but Moises Alou. I don't even know if you guys know Moises Alou.
Yeah.
He was
Montreal Expo.
Yeah, that's right. So he was my favorite baseball player. He didn't wear batting gloves. And this is really gross, but he used to, instead of wearing batting gloves, he used to pee on his hands before games, and he like got the right grip from doing that. I started to like him because he was in the home run derby in like 97 or something. And, I was born in 88, so I was like 10 years old or whatever. And we all drew, I was with my family and friends, and we all drew a name out of a hat to sort of like have that player in the home run derby. And Alou was my player. And ever since then, like I started reading about him, and like he had the most underrated ability to hit fastballs that I'd ever seen from a player. And I just started really liking the dude. And so I followed his career a whole lot. I grew up a Pirates fan, so it was pretty difficult to really love my team, and then in my more adult years, like Andrew McCutcheon's the man. I got to give a shout out to Neil Walker, who is my age, but he just retired recently. Like he's more of like a, not necessarily childhood, but I actually in my back in the day in my in-house leagues, he played in the same league as me. Like he was in the same grew up in the same area. So I got to see him. He got drafted by the Pirates then, which was really cool. And then he went off and, did his thing, and it was a great baseball player. But so he's another guy that I at least have to give a shout because we played in the same in-house organization.
And quick follow-up, how old were you when you stopped peeing on your hands?
No, I do before every podcast now too.
I knew you tried it at least once.
It's a ritual now for everything. Yeah.
Well, most baseball players are superstitious that way, so we'll give you that. Now, I love the Moises Alou kind of reference there. I was a big-time Montreal Expos fan. That's still my team. Nice. I'm Canadian here, so it was either Toronto or Montreal, and most of the country was Toronto, so I automatically went to Montreal because I like to be a contrarian. That's how I like to roll.
Yeah.
So I love that. And then you mentioned Moises Alou, and he played for Felipe Alou there as well. You had that family connection. Those Expos teams back then were as good as any. I remember that lockout year was in '94. They were absolutely destroying teams, and they lost their one opportunity for that World Series championship, which, by the way, still pains me to this very day. Now, I want to get into back to the story here, the origin story of you here, and where did the late round QB tag come from?
Yeah, so I graduated college in 2010, and then I moved out to I went to Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, and so I'm a big Kenny Pickett guy, and more so from a fandom standpoint, but I love my Pitt Panthers. So my wife and I, my now wife and I, moved out to Cincinnati after graduating college. Lived there for 4 years, but the first couple of years there, 2.5 years there, I guess 3 years there, I was working at an ad agency out of school, got my degree in marketing. And then I went and I worked at this ad agency because Procter & Gamble's headquartered in Cincinnati. So there's a lot of ad agencies everywhere. And I had a background, self-taught background in graphic and web design. And then I got my degree in marketing. And so I was a project manager out of school at this ad agency. And after about a year and a half, I'd say, of working there, I realized I just had this moment of I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I can't do this for the rest of my life. This is it's just not, I'm not getting anything out of it. I feel kind of worthless. I just don't feel like I'm utilizing what I think I can do at all. And so one day I just sort of started jotting down my passions and stuff. And fantasy football was one of those things that was jotted down. And then I just started writing about stuff the strategies and stuff that I had utilized in my home leagues. And I was always the dude taking things way too seriously in my home leagues, like everyone else that does this kind of stuff. Right. And so I just started, one day I just sat down, opened up a Word document, and I started to write about the late round quarterback strategy, which at the time, if you landscaped the fantasy football world, this is back in 2012. If you landscape the fantasy football world, everyone's saying, draft this quarterback early, draft this quarterback early. In 2012, there were 5 quarterbacks in single quarterback redraft leagues being drafted in the first round and a half. That's how insane and insanely different it was than how it is now. And so I looked at that and I said, this doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of logic and reasoning and math behind why you should be waiting to draft your quarterbacks. And at the time, a late round quarterback strategy was let's get a quarterback in the 8th round, not waiting in the 15th like people do now, and so on. And so I ended up turning that Word document into an ebook, which at the time there weren't as many ebooks and stuff out there. They were sort of starting to get bigger and whatnot. And so I turned it into an ebook. And since I had this graphic and web design background a little bit, I was able to code it and make it responsive on iPads and stuff. And which is a second nature thing for everyone now. Everyone just assumes that things are responsive and whatnot. Right. And that, was able to design it and do some cool things with it on that end to help differentiate it a little bit. But I wrote the late round quarterback ebook that then launched in 2012, June of 2012. And then that's how I took the handle at late round QB and have just stuck with it ever since.
Nice. So kind of staying on that track and the trajectory of your life, what is something that actually, what would you say is the thing that changed the trajectory of your life the most? Something other than marriage or birth of a child?
Oh man, that's actually, okay. So I'll get it. This is actually a really good question because there was one moment I had a buddy. So I was a senior in college, and I had a really close friend who died in a car accident. He was out drinking that night, and he was being stupid, didn't wear a seatbelt, and he died. And from that moment, it was sort of like this like taking a step back and being like I want to live the way, I mean, he lived the way that he lived was the way that people should live. The nicest human being alive. Everyone knew him in the town that I grew up in. And it was, he was just a really, really positive person. But I sort of took that, and it was always in the back of my head with literally everything that I did moving forward. And I think that it changed just my outlook on life and how fragile it is. And so, it wasn't as difficult for me whenever I hit that wall a year and a half into working to say, you know what, I'm going to go out and try to do something and take a chance because, what's there to lose? And I know what there is to lose, from at a greater scale. And so I just went for it. And I think that was just that whole going through that and the mourning process and all of that. I think it just naturally changes your outlook on life completely. And so that's probably the one thing that is in the back of my mind. I try to, I don't like sit here and I'm never like, that's the reason that I, have taken more chances maybe, or have like viewed this differently or that differently. But I think it's just always lived with me and has been in the back of my mind.
Does that kind of play a role into the decision to make that jump to going out on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to. There's a little bit more on the line going out on my own, just because I'm married now and I've, have a little daughter, and there's those sorts of things that you always have to weigh and think about. The way that I sort of looked at the jumping out and going out on my own was, at my job with this is what I always want to do, is be able to do exactly what I love, produce the content that I love to do, and wear gym shorts every day. That's what I always tell people. I mean, that's all. That's if I got those things, I mean, I'm living the dream, right? And so, so I'm creating the content that I really like to create, and I've always done that to some degree. But when you're working for a big company, or when you're working for any company, there's at least something holding you back to some degree. Like I'm not, and that's not me saying anything bad about Numberfire or Fan Duel. I mean, both of them are incredible places to work where they allow you to do a lot more and give you a lot more freedom than 99% of spots out there. And that's, the fact that I was there for 8 years between the two companies, at least shows you that, there was something there, and that they did treat us really well. But I always wanted to have the freedom, right? And to own what I'm creating, and to really be able to do what I wanted to with that content and have the upside with that content, because I believe in myself and I believe in the stuff that I create, and I want to have ownership over that and upside over that.
So kind of jumping back to, you starting off late round QB, the ebook, going to Fan Duel, going out now on your own with late round QB. Along this journey, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen and witnessed within the industry in itself?
Man, there's been so much. I feel it's so wild, because whenever I started, I was easily like the young guy, like super young. I was like 24 years old whenever I started to do all this. And I got my job in Numberfire at 24, 25 or so. And so like, I was always going to like conferences and stuff, and people would be like, oh, you're so young and you're so like, blah, blah, blah. But like now, like I feel old, like with like amongst people on Twitter, and it's a very strange feeling. But yeah, things have definitely changed. I don't know if it's because like I talk to different people on Twitter, and there's a subset of Twitter that I don't always communicate with, because I'm just not aware that it exists and stuff. But there's always stuff that pops up that's like something drama related, and something that I just try not to be involved with related. But I think that there's the result of, let me take a step back. I'd say that the first few years that I was doing stuff, people were on Twitter and on social media arguing all the time and sort of planting their flags and saying, here are the reasons why, Rashad Jennings is a great, middle round pick this year. And, you go back and forth with people for like a day. And then, it would sort of calm down, and then, you'd move on. And that would happen, but not nearly as frequently as what you see today, because today it's just so much more saturated, and there's just so many more people that are trying to do this because they realize that the industry is big enough to the point where you can do it. Right. And that's the other thing too, is that, whenever I started, there were really only like 4 or 5 places that you could go to get a full-time job in this space. It was like, you're going to Roto World, you're going to Yahoo, you're going to ESPN. And it's like, that's like the extent of it in terms of getting full-time jobs. And so I was really lucky to find NumberFire and to, have a connection with NumberFire to be able to get a job fairly quickly after writing my ebook, about a year after I wrote my ebook. But startups hiring content people, it was not really a thing. And now that's all you really see. Like that's where the focus is within the space in terms of people getting gigs in the space, right? I mean, you have fantasy points, obviously, even back then, Pro Football Focus only had like Mike Clay. It was literally like him who was like running stuff, and he wasn't even full time for a large portion that he was at Pro Football Focus. So it's a more saturated market for sure in terms of the number of analysts that are out there. And I try to connect with as many analysts as I can and talk to them on Twitter and stuff. There's just so many that like I said, there's like these factions of people that I just don't even know exist. I wish I did. I just don't know that they're out there. And so there's just a lot more analysts, but there's also a lot more opportunity. And I would say even now, like the opportunity, it sounds crazy to say this, but like, I do think that the opportunity to get a full-time job in this space, especially with sports betting the way that it is right now, the opportunity is greater versus the amount of people wanting those jobs than it used to be, because there are so many spots now and websites and companies that are realistically hiring people and bringing people on. So I think it's still a really good spot to be in this space, even if you're, newer to the space, and that I think though is the big difference, is that before it was like, hey, I got a job at Roto World and this is like the biggest deal imaginable. I mean, like this is like the highest of the highs. And now people are jumping Roto World or NBC Sports Edge and going to other spots because there are interesting companies out there that are doing really cool things that just didn't exist back in 2012, 2013, 2014.
Yeah. At what point did you decide you want to make fantasy football a full-time job or something more than just a hobby? And also, how did you break that to the wife?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't think that I ever, thinking back to like when I was writing the ebook. So what I would do is I would go to work my 8 hours and try to just be really, really efficient at work. I read Tim Ferriss's 40-hour or 4-hour work week, which is it like published around that time when I was launching the book. And it just really changed my outlook on like how to be efficient with my work and how to view my job. And so not that they can do anything about it now, but that job back then, the ad agency job, I'd be able to get my work done in 2 hours and just be able to like get other stuff done while I'm at work. And then I'd come home. And fortunately at that point in your life, you're in your early 20s and you're, the biggest question you have in life is where are you going to go out drinking on Friday night, right? Like it's like, it's not there's no huge responsibilities going on for the majority of people. At least, I was fortunate and privileged enough to be in that spot. Right. And so, I would come home and, hang out with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and, we'd watch her TV and stuff. And then I would just work on this ebook later in the night. I didn't know what was going to come of it. Honestly, I just did it because I wanted a side hustle and I needed a creative outlet with what I was doing at work. And I think it was a healthier sort of stance in relationship. I think that if you sort of like have this idea in your head that you're going to get something that only few people get, like a job in the fantasy space at that time, or like, there's a lot of people who have side hustles where they sell stuff on Amazon and they get frustrated when they can't get full-time money out of doing that after 6 months. And it's like, there's not a lot of people doing that in the first place. It's really difficult to do that in the first place. So my mindset was always to just create the best thing that I possibly could create, and put as much into it as I possibly could, and be proud of it. Right. And just kind of see where things went. And so, the first year after I launched that book, I was, talking to people on Twitter all the time and trying to get the book out there and get people to read it and download it and stuff. And then I got an opportunity after about 6 months. I got an opportunity from Evan Silva to write for when he was back at NBC Sports to write a feature on Roto World, a series of articles on quarterback value. And I think that was sort of a turning point where I was like, because at the time it was just like, again, like that was the spot. Like if you're writing at a place like Roto World, like you're getting there. Right. And so I had that realization probably around then, like 6 months in. And it's not like I was making a ton of money at this ad agency I was at. It was a really fun job. And, typical, we had like a kegerator and stuff at the spot, ping pong tables. And it was like a really fun job with great people, but it's not like I was making like this killing that if I jumped ship and went to do something else that I couldn't get close to making that kind of money. Because it was still like a fairly entry level gig. And so I ended up getting a job offer from Number Fire in June, or in July. So almost exactly a year after I launched my ebook. And so I took it immediately, because even if I took a small hit from a financial front, I knew that I was going to be doing exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to do.
Nice. Let's talk about some leagues a little bit. What's your favorite league? Your favorite hometown league? We all have that special one that we've had. Our friends since we were kids and stuff like that. Talk to us about your favorite home league.
Yeah, so I have a home league that was started in 2003. So it's been around for a while, and I've been commissioning it throughout that whole time. It's my high school buddies, and then a couple college friends that I made, and then like my brother and my dad are in it. And so we've been playing that for like 20 years. And it's funny. Last year, there's a Pittsburgh Penguins beat writer named Matt Venzel who listens to the Late Round podcast, and I'm a huge Penguins fan. Grew up in Pittsburgh, like I said, and so him and I mutually follow him, and he's DMing me one day like a few years ago, and he's like, "Oh, I love your show," and I was like, "Oh man, I love the Penguins. Like, this is awesome. Let's chat more." And so we'll DM through the years, whatever. And then last summer he hits me up and he's like, "Look, it's the off season. I'd love to do a feature on you in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is one of the Pittsburgh newspapers." And so I was like, "Oh man, that's amazing." I was like, I'm from Pittsburgh. Like, this is like super dope." And so, he calls me one day, does the interview and stuff, and he asked me a question about what my favorite league was. And I said, "It's my home league that I was mentioning." And he's like, "Well, how do you do in your home league?" And I mean, like I'm profitable in fantasy football. Like, I do very well in fantasy football. I had not won my home league since 2009, and I was talking to him last year. Right? It had been that long, and then so the article publishes. He talks about it. All my league mates are just ragging on me because at the end of the article, it talks about how I hadn't won this league in so long. I freaking won the league this year. I got it done.
Nice.
It's done. The curse is over. Thank you. And so it felt like it was hilarious though, because it was like the literal 6 months after he wrote this article and it was all out there that I just couldn't win my home league. I finally actually did win my home league. But that's definitely the one that I care about the most.
That's cool.
And that's also the one when you don't win, you never stop hearing about it, right?
Oh yeah.
Dad wins, brother wins.
Trust me. When I won, so I had like I was up by like 45 or something before the Steelers played the Browns on Ben Roethlisberger's last game, and my opponent had Najee Harris. Najee went nuts in that game. It was easily the best game of his season. And so I still won, fortunately had a big enough cushion. But immediately when the game was over, I had a video that I had created with "We Are the Champions" in the background and some really stupid memes and stuff that was thrown up there. I just texted it to everyone immediately whenever that clock got to 0.
There you go.
Nice.
So we all know you're one of the greats when it comes to hosting a podcast and doing the podcast. And I like to try and think that I can connect the dots a little bit here and there. So I was thinking, you talked about your daughter a little bit earlier. I'm looking back at this Funko collection, and then something clues in. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Oh,
I think it was just a few days ago. And I'm looking because I think you had a birthday on the 19th. We're recording here on the 21st. And I see Anna and Elsa right over your shoulder there. And that was one of the gifts I believe your daughter got you this year.
That's right. My birthday was on Saturday, and she thought that I needed more Funkos behind me. So she picked out an Anna and Elsa Funkos right here, as you can see. And they will be proudly displayed on each of these shows because I love me some Frozen.
I gotta give a shout out because you're able to point to the right spot. You and Tera, you guys got this finger point. You know exactly where you're going. So we kind of talk about you have your own models going on there. Tell us about some of these other nerdy stuff things that we can find on the lateround.com, because I'm not an analytics guy. I'm trying to get into it. I don't understand. I need like an analytics for dummies kind of book for me to kind of read through, because I'm still that dinosaur when we talk about fantasy football analysis here. But I mean, you've got all these models that you've kind of developed on your own. Just kind of talk us through some of these models.
Yeah, so I definitely think that as an analyst, you should be sort of doubling down and figuring out what you're good at doing and focusing on that, and then being open to the things that you're not good at or not as good at. I mean, there are people out there who are way better at me at analyzing film, and there are people out there that are way better at doing data analysis than I am too. Sort of where I always think that I have a little bit of an edge in terms of differentiation is the ability to take some of the data concepts and distill it down to make it consumable and allow people to that may not be super into the data side, may not be a super math oriented person, to at least understand what I'm getting at and what I'm doing. So for instance, I have a wide receiver and a prospect model, right? And they're prospect guides, or they're prospect models that look at how well a player looks analytically entering the league, right? And so what I do is I have a bunch of inputs that get thrown into this model, height and weight and different production metrics and such. And I look at the correlation between a player's score that gets spit out and his average top 2 seasons across his first 3 in points per game. So it could come from year 1, it can come from year 1 and year 2, year 1 and year 3, whatever it is. I average those out, and it gives me a correlation between prospect score and that score, and that whatever that average was, right? And I'm able to test that then against ADP, rookie draft average draft position, as well as draft capital, or where they were drafted in the actual NFL draft. And what I found was that my model is more predictive in terms of how a player performs over his first 3 years than rookie ADP is. And so I saw that, realized that, and I said, well, there's an edge then if you were to utilize my model in this way. And so what I try to do with the model is really, I'm not capable of sitting down and scouting every single prospect that's entering the league. And so, I use the model to guide me and say, this guy has some red flags, this guy doesn't have any red flags. And then I'll still watch the guys, and I'll still do my own film analysis, and I'll read what other people are saying about these players. But the model is giving me a percentile score for these guys. So that's sort of what the prospect models do. And then, on the Patreon, whenever I say like other nerdy stuff, I'm giving people a spreadsheet every week in season, or I plan to, and I already gave them the lowdown on what happened in 2021 in a spreadsheet. But it's really, I understand that I'm looking at this stuff way more than the average fantasy manager. And it has nothing to do with me being better. It's literally my job to, right? And other people are accountants and they're nurses and they're, and they're doing things that are far more important than the stuff that I'm doing. So I'm at least trying to distill all this information and be able to give it to them because they don't have the hours in the day to sit down and, do this data analysis. So what I'm doing with that is basically packaging up all the data that I typically look at, like target share data and backfield share data and deep ball data and all that kind of stuff, where people don't necessarily have access to that easily and understand it easily. And I'm putting it in a spreadsheet that people can just download every week and be able to have every piece of information that I look at in a really consumable and easy to find place. So that's really what the nerdy stuff is all about. I mean, I did my first live stream with patrons last week, and we got into some regression analysis talk and some super legitimately nerdy stuff. But my goal with all of this has always been to be able to distill semi-complex information. It's not like super complex, but semi-complex information for the everyday fantasy managers, so they don't have to, because I know that they don't have time to.
Going back to the podcast, what is one of your most memorable podcasts or interviews that you've done?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know. I usually, what I do with my show, with the Late Round podcast is, I bring people on who just do really, really interesting studies. And then I break down that study with that person into a really short, 20, 25 minute type show, an episode. And so the majority of the episodes are me just doing the solo thing and going that route. I would say though that instead of I'll answer this from the perspective of, instead of the interviewer or someone who I interviewed, the really cool thing that I've experienced is just the people that I've connected with and met through doing this, and the people that I find out are listening to my show. There's one person who found Living the Stream. We started Living the Stream in 2013 or something. I mean, it's been around for a really long time. And early on, really, really early on, the actor Tom Everett Scott, who did, he was in That Thing You Do way back in the day. He's done a ton of stuff. He was in like La La Land. He's been everywhere. He found the show really, really early on. And Denny and I, my co-host, we've become good friends with him like through it. And like, it's a connection that this actor living in Hollywood, and I'm sitting here, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina now. And like the connection would have never been made if not for this, like really this connection that we have in fantasy football. And so I think those are the sorts of things that I really take away and care about most with what I'm able to do is, the people that I'm meeting through it all. It's really, really rewarding. And I feel incredibly lucky to be able to meet the people that I meet.
I love that. I love that. If you were not doing fantasy football, fantasy sports at all, and then let's also nix out the possibility of working at an ad agency, because we already know about that one. If those things didn't exist, what do you think you would be doing?
Oh, man. I don't know. That's the scary part, right? Like, what happens if football goes away? Like, what am I going to do? No, I mean, I would say, I really enjoy, and I have, I mentioned it earlier. I got into the graphic and web design stuff really early on. Like I self-taught myself how to do design work and Photoshop and stuff when I was like 11 or 12. And I did that instead of, everyone's getting like traditional jobs throughout high school and stuff and in college. And I just built people websites. Like that was my thing. And I'm not like good at it anymore at all. I was never like really good at it. But I at least have the skill set of like doing front end development. And, a lot of the stuff on the lateround.com site I built the whole site and like that kind of thing that, that was a really cool part about branching out on my own is that I was able to wear the different hats that I haven't been able to wear in, 8 or 9 years. And so just being able to do that and get my hands dirty with that is probably what I would try to do if I wasn't doing this full time.
Nice.
That's crazy. Building websites at like 11, graphics at 11. It took me till I was like 37 years old to do a graphic. Like, yeah, that's insane. But that's kind of where we were talking about where earlier the trajectory of fantasy football. That's kind of where it's going. You're learning stuff at such a young age. Like I think my kids are putting YouTube videos together at 8 years old. Meanwhile, I'm doing this on YouTube. Definitely not at 8 years old. But hey, enough of that. Now, as a fellow anti-pants enthusiast, I mean, give me gym shorts every day of the week. That's kind of where I'm at. I do not like to wear pants if I don't have to. Yeah. But I need to know, gym shorts or gorilla costumes? Where's the comfort at?
Oh, man. Yeah, I do have that gorilla costume that I feature on lateround.com. There was my daughter's like second Halloween, my wife and I all dressed up as like just zoo animals, and I was a gorilla, like my daughter was a giraffe, and I think my wife was a giraffe also. But there was a picture where I had to get something done. I had to do a live stream before Halloween officially started, and there was a picture of me sitting there in this gorilla costume, and my 2-year-old daughter was like in the vicinity wearing a giraffe costume. And I'm sitting there like on my laptop working. My wife snapped a picture. So that was the picture that I ended up featuring on lateround.com. I'm still going to go with gym shorts. And I say that because the gorilla costume is very, very hot. Very hot.
Speaking of hot, speaking for Bengals fans, I mean, where do you get your percentages from?
In terms of like,
well, I seen there was a tweet out there and there's some Bengals fans asking about I think there was one question there. Where do you get your percentages from? You were talking about the Bengals and apparently someone kind of trolled you a little bit there, asking about percentages and this and that.
Oh yeah. I got you. Yeah. So during the Super Bowl, people were upset about the different penalties that were being called, right? So there was the holding call that everyone talks about, but there was also the missed. I mean, I think we can all agree there's a missed offensive pass interference call with that T. Higgins touchdown, right? Yes. And so I basically, you can go. I mean, again, data scientists who are way smarter than me have built win probability models, and you can see on a play-by-play basis how big of a swing there was in win probability based on the outcome of the play. And so you could see, and you can go look on Numberfire has theirs at live.numberfire.com, which is the Numberfire Live. You can see each individual play and the win probability change that occurred. And I was making the point that the T. Higgins offensive pass interference had a bigger win probability swing than any of the other penalties that were called in that game. And so, like, I understand, like, look, my team has lost the Super. I'm not as big of a Steeler fan as I used to be because it's just difficult for me to, like, from like the standpoint of being objective and like really appreciating the game a lot more than I did as like a rabid fan. But if, 10 years ago, JJ, if you were to talk to me and say like, oh, the Steelers just lost the Super Bowl, which they did against the Packers, I understand the feeling of just like hating life after that, in that moment and just being so frustrated. And so whenever I tweeted that out, someone's like, where are those percentages at? And he just gets really, really mad at me. And so I reversed it and I quote tweeted him and I let everyone know that if you're a Bengals fan, you could come trash my mentions and yell at me for the next day and a half as you let out your frustration, because I don't want people to ruin relationships in real life. You can just get mad at a random fantasy analyst on Twitter.
Oh, that's nice of you.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'll be the punching bag. It's fine. I've been a punching bag enough. It's not a big deal anymore.
Nice. Heading back to fantasy sports, what is one thing that fantasy sports has taught you about yourself?
Oh my goodness. I think that I always talk about this to friends and stuff, but like I went through all this like in my 20s, right? And I feel like that your 20s are when you learn the most about yourself and like who you are and what you want to be for the rest of your life. And you're trying different things and you're experiencing different things and you're sort of just like seeing what life is about in your 20s. And it's an emotional time as well. And I look back at sort of how I handled myself in certain situations in terms of like getting feedback, especially on things. And, I'm 25 years old and people are, the majority of people are saying like, this is great. Like, I love the late round quarterback ebook and all that. And then you hear the trash comments and people saying, this is terrible. Like, this is really dumb analysis and you're an idiot. And it's really easy to focus on the negatives and get really, really frustrated and upset about it. And I used to. Like, it was a very, very real mental health struggle. I mean, it's just when you get bombarded with that kind of thing, it's especially when you have like a singular bad take, right? And you tweeted something that ended up being wrong, any of that, and people start to come at you and call you an idiot and all of that. I didn't really know how to handle that back then. I mean, I'm like 25 years old, and I like seeing feedback in that way. You just don't get that in a normal job that's not consumer facing like this. And so I'd say that the thing that fantasy sports in this job has taught me easily by far the most is how to handle constructive feedback, how to handle feedback in general, and how to not take everything very seriously. Like I've gotten to a point where like I can read I'll go on Reddit and see what people are saying about my podcast and stuff. And again, I'm very lucky that the majority of the feedback is positive and people love the show and they're saying great things about me. And I try to focus on that for sure. And then someone's like, oh, JJ's voice is so annoying. I can't handle his voice. And so what I've really done though, is that like, I've tried to focus on the things that I can control, and I can't control my voice. This is the voice that God gave me, so I can't do anything about it. I can control my analysis. And if people are saying his analysis sucks, I ask why, and I want to learn more. It's not so much that I take it so personally, because I think that everyone needs to lead with a little more empathy, just in general. Like, we just need more empathy with everything. It's just getting so out of hand. It's so difficult to say and do almost anything at this point without like just having someone at least show an ounce of that. But my empathy is more so geared towards the fact that if someone's being mean to an internet or a stranger on the internet, something's going on in that person's life. Like something's going on where they are just not happy to get to the point of literally just degrading someone on the internet. And so, I try to lead it with empathy and say, okay, this person's life sucks right now. I'm either not going to respond to them, or I'm going to do what I did with the Cincinnati Bengals thing. And I'll tweet out and say, I'll be your punching bag tonight. I understand this sucks. And what's crazy, I don't get that many trolls realistically, but when I do get a troll like that, I'll say something compassionate back to that person when they don't expect it. And it immediately flips. They immediately change. They apologize. And it's that simple. Instead of just jabbing back and being angry back at someone, if you lead with that empathy and compassion, it really can change the dynamic of that conversation. And so I didn't know that the first handful of years that I did all this, but I've changed my tune a lot over the last 5 or so years. And it's really, really been helpful, not just for my experience on social media and my experience with my job, but my mental health too. It's just a very helpful thing to do.
I have to give you credit there, because going on to Reddit for comments, that doesn't seem like the best choice out there. I mean, Reddit, they're mean. They can be mean on there. Like, if I'm looking for constructive criticism, I'm going on to Clubhouse. I know no one's there anymore.
Yeah, no. So no, I get it. And I've gotten buddies hitting me up and they're like, why? So I literally, I like probably once every 2 weeks, I Google Reddit with either my name or the Late Round podcast to see what people are saying, because the way I see it is they're saying these things having zero idea. I mean, I comment and stuff, and I'll say like thank you to people who are like promoting my stuff and being supportive. But they have no idea that I'm lurking. And so they're saying things knowing that, number one, they're not doing that to get a reaction out of me. They're doing that because it's just the way that they feel about what I'm producing, and it's free feedback. And so I look at that stuff and I'm saying, oh, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. And I try to take it to heart, because I don't think feedback is like, there's someone that was really like said something about how on my show I don't show enough personality, because it's a very like the Late Round podcast is a very to the point. I edit it really, really tightly. I'll re-say things so that it can be edited tightly, so that people can get exactly what they need in from a fantasy football perspective in 20 minutes or less. They're in and out. They're just getting it all in their brain, and then they're walking away, and they have what they need. The only way to do that is to make it very tightly edited, like I said, and to make it where it's a little bit difficult to like have those side conversations and to like show off your personality, right? But 99% of people listen to the show because of that, right? Because they're able to get all that information. And then there's the 1% of people that'll say, you need to show more personality. This is too boring. Your voice is annoying, blah, 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 blah. And some of the stuff is valid. Like saying that I'm not showing enough personality on that show, it's very easy to look at that and be like, this guy doesn't actually know me. He can go listen to my other podcasts and get my personality. He can follow me on Twitter, or I'm an idiot on Twitter. I can sit there and like think that way, but instead I sit there and be like, I mean, he's not totally wrong, because that's just the nature of what this show is, right? And so I like getting that like that unsolicited feedback that they don't know they're going to get a reaction from me, but I'm able to at least take something away from it.
Yeah, that's some great information right there. We all know relationships are really important in life in general, and try to advance in work or whatnot. Who are some of the people that helped you along the way?
Yeah. My wife, for sure. She never questioned anything, like to probably a degree, which like was kind of weird, that she like trusted that this was going to work and that it was going to be fine. She believed in me more than I believed in me, for sure. So it's really her. I've been lucky. I have really close, like my relationships that I build, and my wife jokes about it all the time, but like my friends, if you become a close friend with me, you're going to be a close friend with all of my friends. Right. I love sharing my life with my friends, and incorporating, different friend groups together and introducing them, and just having like a really great community of friends that are supportive and that I can go to. And so it's literally, I mean, like I didn't face much like backlash throughout like this journey and doing what I'm doing. I think it was more internal than anything else. It was more so like, how am I going to tell people that I'm working in fantasy football? Like it's still weird to some degree. Like whenever I meet someone and they're like, oh yeah, I'm this financial advisor, and I'm the super successful, I own a super successful business. And they're like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, I podcast about fantasy football. Like it's still not like, I'm not totally comfortable with it, because of, I still am human, and I care about what people think to some degree. I can't just completely block out that noise. But at the same time, I'm very lucky that I've had enough support from friends and family, especially my wife, to be able to like have the confidence to go out there and be like, yeah, I podcast about fantasy football, and you might think that's a joke, but guess what? I'm making a living, and I'm wearing my gym shorts every day, and it's awesome. So, go ahead and go to your office job. I'm digging what I'm doing. So,
is there anyone in the fantasy world that you want to give some show some love to?
Yeah. I've again been really, really lucky. The fantasy community is just incredibly supportive in general, and I'm sure you guys have experienced that too. There's just really, really good people in it. Of course, you're going to have some bad ones in there. But there's 99.9% of people are awesome. Rich Rebar and Denny Carter are two that, Rich works for Sharp Football Analysis, and Denny at NBC Sports Edge. They're two, they're like really good friends of mine now. And I met them through doing this stuff, met them online. I've only been around them in real life like 3 or 4 times, over the last 9-10 years. And, but it's like, they're like brother, they're just like a close friend that I went to high school with. And so they've always been incredibly supportive. I mentioned Evan Silva earlier. He really helped me get noticed by a lot of people early on. He was a big believer early on. I don't think that he even realizes how big of a role that he played, in all of that. But yeah, there's a lot. Mike Clay was someone who was really supportive early on and has always been supportive. And even over the last handful of years, like even Matthew Berry has been really, really supportive in the things that I'm doing. And so there's always been people in my corner, which I'm very, very lucky for. But the two that always pop into my head with a question like that is always like a Rich and Denny, because we've just become really, really tight over the years.
That's cool. So now that you are the CEO of your own company there and you're in a hiring position, what is some advice that you can give to those of us trying to make it in this industry? I mean, you dropped some nuggets throughout this whole interview, but if you can like put a bow tie on it for us.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I at Numberfire as the editor in chief before sort of like the tail end of my like tenure at Fan Duel and Numberfire, it was a startup life. So Numberfire started in like 2010-ish or something, 2011. I was one of the earlier employees in 2012, and then we got bought by Fan Duel in 2015. And that's when I transitioned to being a Fan Duel employee. But, Numberfire was a startup. So we were always like, it was intense work, working a lot of hours, trying to get to that goal of either being bought or just making a lot of money through the site itself. And so, while doing that, I was, especially even in the early parts of when I was at Fan Duel, I didn't have any help. I was literally running the Numberfire content site on my own, editing every article, publishing every article, writing my own articles. And we were at the time before I finally got help, we were probably doing 15 to 20 articles a day. And I was the one doing everything. And it was all going through me. And I was organizing our freelance writers. And it was a lot. And so as a result of that, though, I've seen a lot of stuff, like a lot of stuff, right? Like people emailing me constantly, about like getting jobs and getting a writing gig and all that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot. And I've been really lucky, too, that there have been people that have sort of like come through the Numberfire world and gone off and done greater and greater things, bigger and better things, like Scott Barrett, Graham Barfield at Fantasy Points, and Chris Raybon, who does a lot of sports betting stuff now. He started at Numberfire, and that's like the most rewarding thing in the world, man. Like just seeing like these guys, these people who are just so hungry to do this, and then like going out and knowing that you at least like got them to the next step in what they were doing. But to answer your question more directly, like I think from what I've seen, like I said, I've probably read through like 5,000 plus writing samples in my lifetime. And I think that the one thing that people miss within this space still is a combination of differentiation with their content alongside a passion for it. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to be contrarian and be different just to be different, right? Like it's very easy. I can go out there and say, Patrick Mahomes sucks and be a Skip Bayless, but there's only going to be so many Skip Baylesses in the world / do you really want to be a Skip Bayless? Like, do you want that to be your brand? And so, you can differentiate yourself by being contrarian like that. But I always say, be contrarian with passion. And what I mean by that is be contrarian with a backbone, be contrarian with a take and a stance that has substance to it. That's not you just saying things. And one of the things that I always talk about with writers when I would work with them is that when you're writing stuff, throw out the I think statements. Get the I think statements out of your analysis completely. And there will come a point in time where you're big enough where, you can say, I think this is going to happen and people are going to listen. But the one thing you got to always remember when you're starting out, especially, is that, if you want to do rankings or something, no one knows who you are. So why would they listen to your rankings, right? Like get something out there that has that like bulk substance that's really different and a different approach that no one's been thinking about, but have that approach make sense and be logical. And it'll allow you to sort of branch out and be noticed a little bit more. I mean, if you look at a lot of the people who have gotten jobs in the space and been able to do what they do now full time, it's because they had a piece of content that was different, right? Like Graham Barfield with Yards Created, with Matt Harmon with Reception Perception, right? These people who created something unique and different, and there was a backbone to it, and there was a passion to it, and it wasn't filled with I think statements, and they were able to grind it through and get it done. And it showed, right? Like people saw they put a lot of work into it. And so I think differentiating what you're doing on a content front, and being just relatively humble about what you're creating is just very, very important.
Great.
Yeah, I love that bit of advice there. I think that a lot of people could take that to heart here as they continue to put out their content moving forward. Now, I just want to Major, Tera, you guys are with me each and every week here on the Behind the Grind series here. You can find it on the Vipers Network. You can find it on Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, you name it. You can find Major over at Fantasy Points on Sundays. You can find Tera just about everywhere on any day of the week doing her thing. But hey, if you're looking for your weekly rankings, rest of season rankings, nerdy numbers, data downloads, yes, I said data, don't judge me, live streams, and more importantly, bad dad jokes, you need to make sure you head over to lateround.com and sign up for JJ's Patreon right now. And you get a little bit of extra there with that late round prospect guide. And of course, JJ just mentioned here a little bit earlier, the latest podcast, the latest late round fantasy football podcast that just dropped. It's basically a studs and duds college wide receiver kind of prepper there that you want to make sure to get a hold of before we get into draft season a little more in depth here. So JJ, once again, thank you for joining the show here. I love this Behind the Grind. I love getting that in-depth, that deeper look into you. And hopefully we can kind of enter that circle of trust, that friendship circle moving forward.
For sure. I appreciate you guys having me.
And with that said, this has been episode 115 of the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast presented by Fantasy Points Media Group. Head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code Vipers22 and get 10% off that subscription today. And we will see you next week.